Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Chris Harris, Chairman of the States of Alderney Finance Committee, and we're going to talk about current issues. Chris, good to see you. Thanks for sparing me some time.
Thanks for inviting me on, Tony. Always good to see you. Nice to have a chat.
It is indeed. First of all, can you tell us what the role of the Finance Committee is? It's a sort of subcommittee of P&F, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a subcommittee of the Policy and Finance Committee, which you know is our main committee and seats pretty much all of our 10 members, bar one at this current time. It assists P&F in fulfilling the oversight responsibilities relating to financial reporting, policies, strategies, activities, financial risk management. There you go. I mean, it's responsible for recommending financial policies, goals, and budgets that support the mission, values, and strategic goals of the States of Alderney. We undertake scrutiny of states' assets, expenditure, revenues, to ensure that the highest standards of the management of our financial affairs are ensured. On behalf of the P&F committee. So I could read you the entire mandate, but it's huge, so I won't.
No, I don't think we won't do that at this stage. Now, of course, we've got a situation now, unlike a few years ago, where Alderney is actually directly collecting some of the taxes, such as TRP, etc.
That's right.
Presumably, you haven't got enough to balance the budget.
Well, actually, funnily enough, we're currently in a really good position for Alderney at the moment because last year we had an excellent first year when we took over the Alderney property tax from Guernsey. So we're no longer reliant on Guernsey for an annual revenue grant for the first time ever. And as I say, that was an excellent first year in 2021. Our accounts last year showed a surplus in the region of about 1.6 million compared to the forecast of 177,000. So, I mean, that was a pretty good position to be in after the first year. And I'm happy with that at the moment, certainly.
But how much of that, Chris, was the revenue raised from property transactions?
Pretty much all of it, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So, a bit of a one-off.
Well, you know, I mean, the property boom comes with blessings and a curse, to be fair. I mean, the property boom led to a huge increase in document duty and congee for the island. So that's why the books are looking so good at the moment. But on the flip side of that, we now no longer have many properties for sale for people who wish to live and work here. We don't have any key worker housing particularly. So it's difficult to balance that conundrum, really.
Yeah, we'll come on to the housing situation a little bit later on, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Now, Guernsey have got a current deficit, they reckon, of about £80 million, an annual deficit. And they're now sort of suggesting that they've got to make up the deficit by GST or perhaps by a health tax or something along those lines. It does seem to a lot of us that GST really is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, because we all know that at least 3% of the GST will go in admin. And of course, it's highly inflationary. And the one thing you don't want in these times is to stoke up inflation even more than it is at the moment. What are your views on GST?
Well, I have to say I'm not in support of it. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, it's regressive and it's difficult for an island like Alderney that already pay over the top for various things. I mean, if it did come in, to be fair, I haven't seen a great deal of support for it, either in Guernsey or Alderney. If it did came in, we'd have to tweak it accordingly to Alderney's needs. I mean, we pay more for our fuel as it is already, pay more for our food as it is already. So those things need to be considered when looking at GST in the bigger picture. I mean, yeah, we're working close with our Guernsey counterparts to ensure that there's recognition of the cost of living discrepancies that we have between both islands. So, yeah, I don't support it. And like you say, a good analogy of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So we'll see where the debate goes later in the year.
I mean, I'll be quite frank with you. I would support the health tax aspect purely and simply, Chris, because it means that people on lower incomes aren't necessarily going to get hit by it. It will form part of their income tax allowance. So, you know, from that point of view, that seems to be a more equitable way of doing it. Whereas if you go for GST, everybody, irrespective of their income status, is going to get hit.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. I think the health tax, I think, is a potential 3% on top of your income tax, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that was the idea. I mean, Jersey do have a similar model, which they put in place to fund long-term care, that started at 0.5%. That's since increased to 1.5%, and it's forecast to increase further to 3% over longer term. The only slight problem with the health tax is that demand and cost increases. So we need to be confident that the level is sufficient to be sustainable here over the long term. And we'll need to look a bit further into that, I think.
Well, I think everywhere in the world, in say the first world, has got this problem with care, aging population, medical science keeping us all alive a bit longer and everything else.
Absolutely.
And
yeah,
so there you go from that point of view. But I saw recently, Chris, that apparently Jersey are considering taxing large corporations at 15%, which brings them in line with the recent agreements that were made in terms of minimum corporation tax levels. Now, with that in mind, can't Guernsey jack up their corporation tax? I mean, 0.10 is it hasn't worked at all well, in my view.
No, it hasn't worked. I agree. And I think, that's certainly something Guernsey need to look at. I mean, Jersey were looking at putting the tax on companies with over £750,000 turnover. So that was their idea. I mean, I think that would be ideal for Guernsey, really. They need to be looking at something like that because they do have a wealth of companies in Guernsey, rather than put it onto the little guy and charge him off of the island, basically. And
quite honestly, as far as the corporations are concerned, we're talking probably banks, insurance companies, this sort of thing. If it's a level playing field and you've got to pay 15% if you're running your operation in some other low tax area, they're not going to run away on that basis because they're going to get caught, at the next stop, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. They're going to have to do it wherever they go. So it would make sense to do it in Guernsey and get some money in the pot. Yeah. I mean, you can't keep taxing the working population. It's just not sustainable.
Not at all. Now, coming on to a itsy bitsy domestic matter, why can't we pay our rates and our water rates over the phone with the States?
Well, I don't have a concrete answer for you that one, Tony. But yes, I agree. But if anything, the last 2 years has shown us that it's more than possible to do things remotely.
Yeah.
We're doing this remotely now. So I think really in this modern age, you should just be able to phone up the States office and pay your bills over the phone. I mean, it seems odd to me that we can't do that.
Well, we can do it with Alderney electricity. So I just don't see why you can't do it. So what are you going to do, Chris, about sorting it out for us?
Well, I'd pop down there. I only live next door to the island hall, so I could have popped down there today and asked them, but it's a bank holiday, unfortunately. So leave it with me, and I'll pop down tomorrow morning and ask the question. But yeah, I think in this modern age, I mean, you should be able to do that. Everything's done remotely these days, and it just makes life easier.
My point is that we have got an aging population, and a lot of people, probably find it difficult to pop into the States office, or alternatively pop down to the post office to post a check. It must make more sense to be able to do it on the phone. There we are. That's my little whatnot of the day.
No, that's fine.
It wasn't that long ago where the States were saying that there was every likelihood that the public could attend P&F meetings, policy and finance meetings. What's happened to that? It seems to have sort of got kicked into the long grass.
It's not a case of kicking it into the long grass. It's one of those things that's tied up with process at the moment. There's changes to the rules of procedure, et cetera, which have to go through the law office, I believe. So we are working on it. It's taking a little longer than we might have hoped. But yeah, I think that'll be a good thing for the island when we actually get around to doing it. A lot of us stood on the promise of openness and transparency. You hear those buzzwords around occasionally, but yeah, we do mean it. We do want to get more involved with the public, and I think that would be a step in the right direction. You have to be careful because we do have confidential items quite often on the agenda, so there has to be a balance. But yeah, I'd be keen. I think it works well at the moment with the open planning meetings that we have for the Building Development Control Committee. So yeah, once the process has been worked through, we'll get to it, and I'm looking forward to it, definitely.
So hopefully when
I can't give you an answer, but it's in the process at the moment.
Before the next election?
I would certainly say so. Yeah.
Okay, well, we won't necessarily hold you to that.
No, please don't. It's out of my hands.
We talked briefly at the beginning of this chat about this question of housing policy, and I feel so much sympathy for youngsters wanting to try and buy a house or even rent a property at the moment. I mean, it's totally unacceptable where we are. And it seems to me that the state's main assets are various buildings and pieces of land. So why can't we get on with Whitegates? Why can't the old Connaught be converted into studio flats? You've got the asset, ain't going to cost that much to sort it out.
No, you'd think not, but yeah, like everything, stuff gets tied up with process. I mean, for me, our greatest asset on the island is our working population and those that contribute to our excellent community. So we have to look after them first and foremost. Whitegates, as you know, is designated for social housing. We've got a housing task group, I think it's called. I thought it was the housing action group, but I think it's the housing task group, which have been preparing reports for us to look at options for various states' assets, including the ones that you mentioned, namely the Connaught, Whitegates, and the old fire station just along the road from my house there. So, I think both of those properties personally should be tied in with social housing, especially Whitegates, because that's what it's designated at the moment. I mean, you're well aware of the previous banquage scheme that we had back in the day that worked to an extent until it sort of didn't work again. But maybe we could do something like that out of Whitegates, make it manageable for young first-time buyers to get on the ladder, or indeed have more social housing out there. I think some of the arguments for social housing at that end of the island is it's a little too far, but realistically, we live on an island that's 3 miles long, so nowhere's particularly far. But yeah, absolutely, housing is a priority for us. Social housing, affordable housing. I mean, there's always a difference between simply housing and affordable housing. It has to be affordable because we have so many properties on the island now that if they were sold, a young working family would never be able to afford to buy them. So it's quite difficult in that respect. But I'm not one that would like to sell off the family silver, to coin a phrase. We just have to make much better use of our assets that we have. And yeah, housing is the way forward as far as I'm concerned.
But you've got a great lump of land down at the banquage, going from the banquage along to the battery quarry area. You know, surely that could be exploited, couldn't it? On the similar basis to the original banquage, you know, here it is, build a property sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, the space is already there. I mean, it's not going to take anything away from the area because the area is what it is. So I think, yeah, that's a key thing for the housing task group to look at as well.
Why don't, where does the Housing Association fit into all this, Chris?
Well, the Housing Association, they no longer have Whitegates under their remit. They gave it back to the states a few years ago. So that's solely our responsibility now, I believe. I could be wrong, but I believe it's our responsibility as the states. But yeah, we have one of our members who's in constant liaison with the housing group, and they're working in conjunction with the housing task group as well. So they're well in the loop and we're well in the loop.
But I thought the Housing Association had the responsibility for social housing on the island. And it seems that, you know, they're being a bit selective. They take the bits they want and dump the bits they don't want back on the states.
Well, I couldn't comment on that, but yeah, maybe.
Okay. You were also talking, I believe, Rhys Jenkins in particular, some time ago about aid for first-time buyers. That's going to be difficult, isn't it?
That is difficult, yeah, because a lot of our income is dependent on our property tax and stuff like that. So if we wanted to use that money to assist first-time buyers, etc., then we might have to put those rates up to facilitate that. So something we're always a bit loath to do is put an increase on rates. So it's a bit of a conundrum, but the housing task group are working on that for ideas, particularly Rhys. So.
But the problem all the time is that you can't beat the market, and the market is beating you left, right, and centre at the moment, isn't it? With the way housing prices have gone up over the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's becoming very difficult for anybody that lives here. You know,
Yeah.
I wholly agree. I mean, I've seen houses go on sale for X amount, and then they're on sale again 6 months later for X amount plus 20% or something like that. You know, it's huge. So yeah, it's unmanageable for youngsters and working families on the island at the moment.
Okay, let's now talk about the airport and specifically the runway, because I hear that if you're going to upgrade it for ATRs, You're going to have a new terminal building with segregated arrivals, departures, security fences, £1 million scanners. And not only that, Chris, but the height of the runway, the existing runway, is substantially higher than the actual apron. And I was speaking to a pilot the other day, and he was saying he would certainly not want to bring an ATR down that slope from the runway to the apron because of the risk of brake failure and stuff like that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, when you look at it, the apron there is, and the taxiway is lower than the runway. But I mean, they're working on their business case and their feasibility study and everything at the moment. So I think really the strengths or the weaknesses will be highlighted by that. I mean, I hope that as many people on the island as possible went to the open day down at the Island Hall, which was well attended and well received for the most part. But of course, like, we're a small island, our airport is old, we've got difficulties. I hope those difficulties are remedied in the near future. But
how can you justify 50 million quid for possibly one flight a day to Guernsey and one flight a day to Southampton, if you're lucky?
Yeah, I mean, we're working on speculation.
It doesn't stack up, Chris.
No, I hear where you're coming from, but I mean, this is ultimately, you know, these things will be decided by the strength of the business case, or not. I can't speculate on an actual figure at the moment because that figure isn't, you know, it hasn't been fully calculated. I mean, people have thrown around the figure of 50 million. It could be, well, I'd like to say it could be less, but these things are never less.
Could be even more, couldn't it?
Actually? Well, it could be even more. But if the states of Guernsey and the states trading supervisory boards, along with their airline, etc., deem it to be a sensible option that will reduce the losses over the years, then we'll take it from there. But I mean, we have to look at it.
Chris, you're talking about Guernsey running an annual deficit of £80 million already. How can politicians justify sticking another £50 million into the onto the debit side of the balance sheet? It just doesn't add up. I mean, my understanding was that a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, the idea was to widen the runway to 23 meters from 18,
right. Yeah.
Which meant the Dorniers could then operate with a much higher crosswind capability. And that's just got kicked out of touch as far as we can see. And if they go for this rehabilitation of the airport, it's going to be at least 5 years doing something like that, isn't it?
Well, it's not going to happen overnight, that's for sure. I mean, it will take a long time. They have to get all the tender processes and everything in place, and you know, by the time it actually happens, costs might well have increased as they want to do, unfortunately. But I mean, all options are still on the table. We have option A, option B, option C, and C is obviously the one you're referring to, with the lengthening and widening of the runway, as well as the new terminal facility, etc., etc. I mean, I try not to look at it from an airline perspective, because you know that I work at the airport, but I try and look at it as an island perspective, really. And for me, any development that might happen up there is safeguarding and future-proofing the island for years to come. Because if it doesn't happen now, when will it happen? You know, if not now, then when, if at all?
But the problem with it is, you know, do you think that 2 flights a day are acceptable? Number one. Number two, if you're running an aircraft with a 72-seat capacity and you're only carrying 40 people, you're going to run that at a loss in any case.
Well, it does make me scratch my head, certainly, when you put it that way. Yeah, I mean, if you could have a fully laden ATR with 72 passengers on here, that, you know, there might be more of an argument. But I do agree that, well, I'd certainly hope that they're looking at the figures that would relate to, say, what a 50 passenger payload would do to the balance sheet. So it'd be interesting to see once the final calculations, etc., all come in. But in the meantime, we've got to consider the future of the island and how to safeguard it. And I think really every problem that we always seem to have comes down to connectivity on the island.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, I'm sure you agree with me on that. But,
totally. I've got no issue with connectivity. I've got no real issue with Alderney as such, but I just don't see what we gain if we end up with one service a day to Guernsey and one to Southampton. where does that put people going down for medical appointments? Immediately, they're going to have to pay for overnight accommodation, aren't they?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell really, or to speculate without actually seeing a proposed schedule. I'd be very interested in seeing that, because obviously the first flight from Alderney in the morning would need to go to Guernsey for the very reason that you've said, medicals, etc. So I imagine it would come here. It would come here from Guernsey in the morning, go back to Guernsey, and then onwards to Southampton. So you might lose your direct route to Southampton initially, but really without seeing a mock-up of any schedule, it's hard to speculate. But I imagine that with bigger loads, you might see reduced frequency, but you might also see more reliability. So it's that balancing act. You're not going to have problems caused by holes in the runway. You're not going to be so affected by crosswinds. Maybe your landing limits will be better in foggy conditions. So it's finding that balance, and I hope once the report comes out, we'll see that balance and where we go from there.
When do you expect it? Yeah, when do you expect it?
Sooner rather than later, I believe.
Yeah. But I mean, before the end of the year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm hoping within the next 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but hopefully.
Coming back to Alderney now, have you actually had sight of the public service obligation document?
Not personally, no, unfortunately.
So as far as that's concerned, it just seems to me that all it has done is grant Alderney a 5-year exclusivity contract on the routes to Guernsey and to Southampton. Now, PSOs in the UK, if you take, for example, the railways, actually impose financial implications on the provider in the event of non-performance. Give you an example. Not so long ago on Network Rail, if you were running a minute late, you got fined £90 by the regulator, which was a cumulative situation. It seems to me that this PSO has nowhere near the sort of breadth that one would expect from it in terms of commitment from the airline.
Perhaps not, but I mean, I try and look at it in a positive light. But we've now got we're tied into a service for the next, probably 4 years now. So,
yeah.
and the subsidy for that has increased from 2 million to 2 million from 1 million. So, the current Guernsey administration in the States, they see Alderney as worth investing in that respect. So, yeah, I do see your point, but yeah, I mean, it gives us it gives us something concrete for the next few years.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It gives you a guarantee, which of course you wouldn't have had if for example, we'd been using Flybe or somebody like that.
Exactly.
But the other thing, of course, is the level of the fares from Alderney. I've just booked up to go to Southampton, the two of us. We get the old age discount, and it's over 500 quid return. BA from Heathrow down to Malaga, business class, 1,350.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend the pricing. I mean, it is prohibitive for a lot of people, but small island communities, it's going to be like that. I think the Scilly Isles with their Skybus operation is twice the amount as here for their per flying mile, I believe. I mean, yeah, I think that's the case. So they're certainly not any cheaper than we are.
Yeah.
So that is one of the downsides of living on a small island. But hopefully, if we had a bigger aircraft with more seats, maybe you'd see those rates decrease. I would certainly hope so anyway.
Okay, well, watch this space, as they say.
Well,
now,
absolutely.
let's go from air to sea and have a look at this ferry deal, because one of your colleagues described it as having slightly smaller capacity. It's 1/3 smaller.
Yeah, that's a little bit more than slightly smaller, but the fact of the matter is we are where we are. We put out for a tender process. We had a few applications that came back, and the one that we have was the winning bid because of the feasibility of being able to do it. So yeah, obviously it is smaller. We would have hoped for a larger ferry, but it's very difficult to get a bigger ferry in Alderney that's over 12 seats due to various laws and regulations and need for crew and everything like that. So it's not as easy as some people might hope. But at the moment we are where we are, and so far the Salty Blonde has provided a good service for those that have used it.
What's the commitment just for the season, is it?
Yeah, at the moment there'll be a new tender process next year, as there is every year. So you never know what will happen next year. But in the meantime, I wish them the best of luck. They helped out enormously when we had the disruption at the airport over the Easter weekend, along with a lot of other smaller vessels as well. So,
do their guests get priority over the general public?
No, that's something we're very specific about when we were considering the tendering process. I mean, we wouldn't have offered a subsidy or anything like that if they were going to prioritise hotel guests over the public. I mean, I do believe that they've actually offering that they intended to offer this service for the public to begin with anyway, as opposed to shuttling guests between islands or whatever like that. So yeah, it's very much for the island, not for their business.
Remind me of what the subsidy is, how much it is.
Off the top of my head, I think I haven't got the exact figure here, but I think in previous years it was up to 130,000 per year. Based
per
on the
season.
Amount, per season, based on the amount of successful rotations.
Okay, right, fair enough. And presumably this new deal is similar, despite the fact the capacity is less.
Well, it will be, but I mean, hopefully they'll be adding more rotations in as and when demand warrants. So we'll hopefully over time see the same amount of people coming in as we would have beforehand, just on a slightly smaller vessel, but with more rotations. Touch wood.
Now, I know you're not chairman of General Services, but what happened at the harbour? I saw photographs of old people having to go up vertical ladders. I saw photographs of babies being carried across dinghies. It's just totally unacceptable, that. And I'm sure if your insurers had any idea of what was going on, they would absolutely tear their hair out.
I'm sure they absolutely would. I don't think you'll find myself or any of my colleagues suggesting that that's the way to be. I mean, it obviously isn't good enough. And, hopefully with the full harbour review that we're going to be conducting and everything, these things will be addressed. But it's been difficult over the Easter periods and before that, because usually, like when we've had the previous ferry operator, they don't start operating until, well, I think it was the end of May, maybe middle of May or end of May. So, the season has started earlier this year as far as sea transport's concerned. And we've had a lot of, smaller vessels coming over as well to help with disruption at the airport. So I'm not going to say we were caught unawares, but with the pontoon going in usually around Easter time every year, we were hit, with problems before that went in. So it's been very difficult this year. I mean, we've had 2 or 3 weeks of northeasterly winds that scuppered getting the pontoon in completely, coupled with a couple of boys off at the airport, at the harbour with COVID. So that hasn't helped. But I absolutely agree. It's not manageable and it's not suitable.
I've never had this before, but Zoom is giving me a countdown on this interview, and we've got 9 minutes left, so we're going to have to roar through it. First of all, St. Peter Port Tunnel. Is that a joke?
Well, I did check the date when I saw that, to be fair. But having read up a little bit more about it, I mean, I understand the thought behind it. It's trying to take traffic away from the seafront. It's trying to have more alfresco dining, being a little bit more environmentally aware, blah, blah, blah. But yes, I mean, it does seem a little bit,
and that's against
over the top.
And that's against an £80 million deficit.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I mean that's the clincher there with that one. So
energy. I did an interview with James Lancaster last week. I don't know whether you had a chance to see it, but he says that he hopes that you can look at tariff reform and perhaps higher standing charges and lower unit prices. Would you be in favour of that?
Yeah, sure, I would, but I'm not going to go into any great detail on
this. No, I'm not expecting.
I know that James has probably already covered all of those points, but I've been informed that this work is being undertaken by AEL at this current time, and they're rewriting and renewing the 1953 concession law leading up to next year. So there's going to be I mean, they're looking at it at the moment, so I'll leave it in their more than capable hands.
Have you got any news on Fab?
I mean, FabLink still have an option agreement up until the end of this year, I think, which is to cross the island with a cable and so forth. That's only up to the end of this year. They've also licensed through DEFRA a route around the island that would avoid coming across the island. So, I mean, any real questions Fab related should be directed at them. but obviously, you know, being part of the planning committee, any major project, of course, would have to be dealt with in terms of the land use plan. I think section 3.17, which relates to major projects. So, you know, that would have to jump through all of the hoops and everything like that if the time ever comes.
Yeah, would that involve a public inquiry then?
I would hope so, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's going to, you know, delay it quite a bit in any case, I suppose. Unfinished swimming pool and new sports hall.
Well, yeah.
How do the states square it with the public, bearing in mind the public put in, what, £250,000, the states themselves put in £250,000, and all we've got is a building that's not fit for purpose?
Well, it's a real shame, because I'm not going to take away the hard work from the people that organised that in the first place.
Yeah.
The intentions were pure. They wanted to do something very good for the island. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and a lot of people have invested a lot of time and money into it. You know, I wish them the best of luck at the time, and it didn't come good, unfortunately. But now there's a new proposal to have something else at the bottom of the school playground area there, which is being dealt with by, I can't remember what they're called, but
Sports Trust, isn't it? Is it the Alderney Sports Trust?
Yeah, that's it. The Sports Centre Charitable Trust. So, yeah, I mean, it's quite clear that as a community, we need a swimming pool. We need better facilities for our youth and for the community as a whole. So I wish them the best of luck. I mean, public opinion seems to be favourable, but, you know, we need to repurpose that old, well, I say old, I mean, it's been there a few years now, but the current swimming pool into something more fit for purpose, whether that's part of the school or whether that's another community project, remains to be seen. But yeah, I'm looking forward to what happens. Housing, well, you never know.
Alderney Mine do a great job.
Agreed.
Do the states help them financially?
Well, we have done, I believe. Yeah, we've dealt with them in some capacity within the finance committee before. I wholly support the Alderney Mind initiative. I'm a qualified mental health first aider myself. I did the course when they first started out. So yeah, it's very important, because mental health is, you know, it is health. It's not just mental health. It's
particularly in these times, definitely. Now, sorry to rush you, Chris, but you know, I don't want this thing to conk out. Voting age to 16, still 18 in the UK, and you know, whilst I've got nothing against it in principle, it's a bit of a contradiction when you have to be 18 for alcohol. You can't drive. 18 for cigarettes. You can't drive a car until you're 17. It does seem to be a little bit of a strange situation.
Well, I do see your argument, but for me, I am in support of this, because I said at the States meeting the other week, the youth are the future of the island. You know, and the future belongs to the youth. I think it's very important to get them involved in island life and how the island works or doesn't work. Gives them the opportunity to mould their future by voting for somebody potentially who sees their requirements and needs a little bit more than some of the people that we might have stand for the states. So I'm not saying that I'd ever advocate a 16-year-old minor standing for the states, but I do agree that they should have a say in how the future of the island is moulded. It's very important.
But doesn't that come into it? If they're entitled to vote, they're entitled to stand, aren't they?
Well, I suppose it does. Yeah. I mean, you have to look at that as a bigger picture for sure. But I think, I do think we need to. We spend a lot of time in Alderney working with the elderly demographic, of which we have many. I think sometimes the youth of the island get a little bit left by the wayside.
I couldn't agree more. And you know, if we haven't got the youth, we haven't got a future, as you say. So there we are. Any news on refugees from Ukraine?
Not at this time. I mean, if we could facilitate it as an island, I would obviously support refugees coming to the island. You know, such as we have a rich history of refugees ourselves. You know, and I think, it would be very important to offer assistance where we can, but we have to be practical, really, in Alderney, because we've already discussed we don't have housing for people that live here. We don't have worker housing. So you've really got to be realistic when it comes to something like that. But if people were saying, oh, no, we didn't want refugees over here within my organisation, within the States, I wouldn't just question their politics. I'd question their morality as well. So, you know, but realistically, it's not as easy for us as it is for some other areas.
Finally, Chris, elections due at the end of the year. Are you going to stand again?
Well, I can't believe where the time's gone, Tony.
No,
to be fair, and
I can
I've still
imagine.
got a little bit. I've still got a little bit of hair, and it isn't too grey at the moment, so it hasn't been all bad. Yeah, I'm going to have to say, honestly, I'm a little bit up in the air when it comes to standing again this year, because I have to juggle a full-time job and
That's the
various other
problem.
commitments. Well, you know, it's difficult for a working age sort of person
That's
to
it. Yeah.
juggle that. But it's been an honour and a privilege to have served my island, and I'm not going to say never at all. So yeah, watch this space, and we'll see how we get on. But yeah, it's been a joy so far. I mean, it's had its ups and downs, but we'll see where we go. Certainly.
Good. Well, I'm pleased to hear that. And can I thank you very much for sparing me some time on this bank holiday?
Yes, thank you.
Looking out the window, it's a typical bank holiday. It's cloudy, horrible, and you know, who knows?
Yeah, standard. But yeah, thank you for accommodating my busy schedule.
That's my pleasure. You take care of yourself. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, all the best, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you.